in working toward a master's in business administration, which I have to admit is a dime a dozen everywhere, but not in the priesthood, so I thought it would be a useful thing to get. I learned that when working with employees or fellow employees, in writing a review, even a negative one is discouraged, if not outright forbidden, to describe someone as arrogant. Mainly because it's become a catch-all word nowadays that pretty much means different things for different people. And for the most part, while we pretty much, I think all of us have the experience of having met someone who is completely and thoroughly full of themselves, all it really means is, I don't like you, and it's your fault. Now, naturally, none of us want to be referred to as arrogant. That's a terrible thing to be labeled as. But what's the alternative? The alternative to arrogance is humility, which also can be a bit tricky. I once told the Archbishop in a conversation, just to see his reaction, I said, humility really isn't much of a virtue to really strive for. And he looked at me like I was, what are you talking about? Of course it is. I said, well, think about it. Once you think you have it, you've lost it. Even C.S. Lewis, in his Screwtape Letters, the demon Screwtape, writing to his nephew Wormwood, advising him on how to corrupt his subject, he says, humility is the easiest virtue to overcome. All you have to do is just keep whispering in the subject's ear, that was very humble of you. That was very humble of you. And sooner or later, he's going to say, yes, that was humble. And lo and behold, you've overcome the virtue of humility. So what is one to do with this virtue that we're all called to have? We certainly don't want to be full of ourselves and arrogant, but how do we really strive for humility without losing it once we really realize or think we have it? And perhaps the key to that is gratitude. Gratitude. And today we celebrate a day dedicated to gratitude. But even celebrating gratitude and being thankful, it might be worth looking at how we go about giving that thanks or expressing that thanks, because one thing that's popular, I saw it on the news shows as commentators are talking about Thanksgiving and what they're thankful for. Some families have a tradition on Thanksgiving of going around the table and saying what it is they're thankful for. And what's wrong with that? Well, nothing really, but when you think of it, what are we really doing when we say we're thankful for this, we're thankful I have that? We're basically saying I'm happy that I have it. I'm happy for this. I'm happy for that. I'm thankful for what I have. I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for this food. I'm thankful for my talents. And all it really means is I'm happy for them. I'm happy that I have them. But what is it we mean when we say we're celebrating Thanksgiving and we are giving thanks? We're not just simply happy for what we have, but we recognize that what we have is owed to someone else. It is Thanksgiving Day, not Thankfulness Day. And the very fact that we have this as a national holiday, a national day of giving thanks, is not just a national day of wallowing in our own happiness for a particular blissful glee of whatever state we happen to be in, but we recognize we must direct that thankfulness to someone. And as a nation, this day, even though it became a national holiday just in the last century, is still nevertheless symptomatic of the very fabric of our country on what it was founded, how it was founded, and the values we seek to emulate as citizens. And that is, we are a nation that was established and founded on the principles that acknowledge a higher power. Nature and nature's God. Divine providence. The supreme judge of the world. Rights endowed upon us by our Creator. All four of those phrases are found in our Declaration of Independence. Even early treatises put forth by the Congress, actually just prior to the drafting of the Constitution, while we were under the Articles of Confederation, the newly acquired Northwest Territory, in the Northwest Ordinance that governed how we settle and live in those new territories that are now Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and parts of Minnesota, At one point in the Northwest Ordinance, it declares that for the fostering of good citizens, churches and schools are to be established in the towns. Churches and schools, in that order. In that order. Not because they wanted to establish a state religion, didn't say what church would be established, but because the founding fathers knew the importance of faith in a fabric of a country. And without that faith, something is going to fill the void. We need look no further back than the French Revolution, which was a revolution against the royalty and the church, for reasons that perhaps historically we can understand, but nonetheless it was a revolution that worked to push out religious influence and set up a purely Enlightenment society. But something filled that void, and it was the Great Terror. Tens of thousands of people went to the guillotine. It was a great atrocity and a great blight on the French Revolution. Robespierre, one of the fathers of the French Revolution, realized this and tried in vain to establish a state religion of the supreme being, an Enlightenment religion, but it was too little too late. And it wasn't until after, among other things, the horror of seeing our own Catholic martyrs of Compagnie, a whole convent of Carmelite sisters who went to the guillotine because they refused to close their convent, refused to disperse as sisters, that the Great Terror ended within days, perhaps even within hours. When the heroism of people of faith stepped forth in the midst of that Great Terror, it was that presence of faith that led to the end of it, and a restoration of at least the presence of religion in what was hoped to be a purely Enlightenment society. But our founding fathers knew something will fill that void if faith in God is absent. And we see even today minority factions within our country that seek to push out religion and faith from the public square, taking freedom of religion and calling it freedom of worship, keeping it confined to the home and the churches and out of the public square. And what do we see? We've seen moral chaos, decadence. Something will fill that void. And our fathers knew we are a nation founded upon faith in God. And in celebrating this day of Thanksgiving, it's not simply a day of thankfulness, but a day of thanksgiving, in which we give thanks to someone to whom we are owed everything we have. It is God who has blessed our nation. It is God who has given us our talents. It is God who has blessed us with our family, our friends, our fortune, our prosperity, our happiness. And today is a day in which we take aside a few moments and give thanks to God. And think about it, really. Think about it. It's a fascinating phenomenon we see in this country. Yesterday is the most traveled day of the year. The most traveled day of the year. When you look at aerial shots of the 405 highway in Los Angeles, bumper-to-bumper cars at night, one row of red with the cars going in one direction, one row of white with the cars coming in the other direction. All we need is blue and we have the American colors, or green and we have Christmas. But that red and white going in either direction. The airports, chaotic with people traveling. All these people, we even have movies about people traveling the day before Thanksgiving, and they're traveling in such droves to get to a meal. To gather with people for a meal with a theme of giving thanks. You want to know the heart and soul of our nation? That is the heart and soul of our nation. Despite its warts, despite its flaws, despite all the shortcomings it continues to try and overcome, and despite the mess that things may seem to be today, morally and socially and otherwise, every year we see this pandemonium to get to a meal with family and loved ones to give thanks. That is the heart of our nation, and it will never be lost. And that is something truly to give thanks for. But it's not simply a wallowing in the happiness that this is how things are for our country, or wallowing in the happiness and being thankful for what we have, but in giving thanks to a God we acknowledge and whose existence that we acknowledge is the foundation of our nation from its very founding. We even have a psalm in the scriptures, of 150 of them, yes, there are many, but a psalm that's called the Jewel of the Psalter is Psalm 118. In the Liturgy of the Hours, the breviary that we priests are obliged to pray, we pray it every Sunday, if not at our morning prayer during the daytime hours. Psalm 118. It has many, many well-known phrases in it, such as, "The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," are all in this one psalm. But it begins and ends with the same line. And perhaps a day in which we can define, a phrase in which we can define this day. Very simply, it states, beginning and ending, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever."